You can't be serious, Dad, I said, my voice quivering as I stared at him across his imposing oak desk. My father leaned back in his leather chair, as calm and collected as ever, letting out a slow breath. This isn't up for debate, Elizabeth, he replied, placing his cigar in the ashtray as if the matter was already settled. My fists clenched at my sides. But I refused to back down. So that's it? I asked, my words cutting through the air. You'd rather hand everything to James, someone who doesn't even care, than give me a chance to prove myself. All because I'm a woman? He didn't flinch. This firm is for your brother to run, Elizabeth, he said firmly. You've done well with your education, and you'll make a wonderful wife someday. But this isn't your place. My name is Elizabeth Carter. I'm 26, a Yale-educated lawyer, and the daughter of William Carter, owner of Carter & Partners, one of the most influential law firms in Houston. My whole life has been about proving myself, excelling in school, dominating debates, graduating with honors, all to follow in my father's footsteps. But standing there in his office, surrounded by the scent of leather and smoke, I felt my world tilt. It didn't matter how hard I'd worked or how much I loved the law. To him, I was just his daughter, meant to marry well and step aside. I locked eyes with him, my voice steadier now. James doesn't care about this firm, Dad. He's reckless, barely past community college, and has no clue how to run a business. You know that as well as I do. My father sighed, rubbing his forehead like I was the unreasonable one. James will learn. He's my son, Elizabeth. It's his birthright to take over Carter & Partners. And you, he paused, his tone softening slightly. You have other paths, a future without the burden of running a firm. I'm protecting you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Protecting me? I shook my head. You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back. I've earned this, worked harder than anyone, including James, and you know it. But you won't give me a shot because you're too set in your ways to see what I can do. His face hardened, and I knew I'd crossed a line. That's enough, Elizabeth, he snapped. We're done here. I stormed out, my heels clicking loudly against the marble floors of our family's estate. My mother was in the sitting room, arranging flowers in a vase. She glanced up as I passed, her face gentle but weary. Elizabeth, she said softly, what happened? I stopped, turning to her with a mix of anger and despair. He won't let me work at the firm, I said, my voice breaking. He's giving everything to James and expects me to just accept it. She sighed, her hands pausing over the blooms. Your father has his ways, she said hesitantly. Maybe it's best not to push him. Dear. He means well. I stared at her, stunned. Means well. I echoed. Mom, he's throwing away everything I've worked for because I'm a woman. How can you defend that? She dropped her gaze. And I saw the years of quiet surrender etched into her features. I just don't want you to get hurt, she murmured. Sometimes it's easier to let things be. Her words lingered. And I realized I was alone in this fight. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my father's words weighing on me. I thought of all I'd done to reach this point. Late nights studying case law, endless debates at Yale, the sacrifices I'd made to uphold the Carter name. And for what? To be told I didn't belong. That my worth lay in marrying into another prominent family? The idea made me sick. The next morning, I was packing my suitcase when my bedroom door creaked open. My mother stood there, pale and confused. Elizabeth, what are you doing? She asked, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his face stern. What's going on? He demanded. Stepping inside. Where do you think you're going? James sauntered in last, leaning against the doorframe in his robe, smirking. Packing for a trip, sis? He teased. I snapped my suitcase shut and stood tall, facing them. I'm leaving, I said simply. Since I'm not welcome at the firm and don't fit into this family's plans, I'm going to find a place where I do. My father's expression darkened, and my mother clutched her necklace, looking like she might cry. Elizabeth, she pleaded, don't do this. Let's talk. But I shook my head, unwavering. There's nothing to talk about. You've all made your priorities clear. My father's jaw tightened as he stepped closer. Don't be absurd, Elizabeth, he said coldly. This is your home. Where would you go? To prove some point. I met his gaze without blinking. Yes, Dad, I said firmly. To prove I'm worth more than being sidelined for someone who hasn't earned a thing. You made it clear last night I have no place in your firm, so I'll find one that values me. James chuckled, crossing his arms. You're making a big deal out of nothing, Liz. Throwing a fit because Dad won't hand you the reins. His smug tone pushed me over the edge. "This isn't a fit, James," I snapped. "It's me taking charge of my life, something you've never had to do because everything's been given to you." My father raised a hand, silencing us. "Enough," he said sharply. "Elizabeth, you're not leaving. You belong here with your family." I shook my head, grabbing my suitcase. "No, Dad. I belong where I'm valued, and that's clearly not here." I walked past them, my suitcase rolling behind me as I descended the grand staircase. My mother followed, her voice shaky. "Elizabeth, please don't go," she said. "We can work this out as a family." I paused at the bottom, turning to her, the woman who'd spent her life silencing herself for peace. "Mom," I said gently, "I love you, but I can't keep pretending things will change if I stay." "They won't." My father watched from the top of the stairs, silent, his face unreadable. James lounged against the railing, unbothered, as if my leaving meant nothing. I opened the front door and turned back one last time. "When you're ready to see me as more than a daughter to marry off, you know where to find me," I said calmly but firmly. Then I stepped out, the cool morning air hitting my face as I shut the door behind me. For the first time, I felt truly free. I didn't look back. Within days, I landed an interview at one of Houston's top law firms. They didn't care that I was a Carter. They cared about my credentials and determination. When I walked into that office, I wasn't William Carter's daughter. I was Elizabeth Carter, Yale grad and driven attorney. By week's end, they offered me a job, and for the first time, I felt I belonged somewhere for my abilities, not my name. The work was tough, but fulfilling, and I excelled in an environment where I wasn't overshadowed by anyone else. My new boss, a sharp, forward-thinking man named Daniel Pierce, mentored me, valuing my perspective and pushing me to take on more. Within months, I was tackling high-profile cases and earning my colleagues' respect. It wasn't the life I'd pictured growing up, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. Professionally, I thrived, but the nights were harder. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, no matter how right it felt. In quiet moments, like coming home to an empty apartment after a long day, the loneliness hit. I missed my mother's gentle presence, even if she never fought for me. I even missed James's chaos, as maddening as he was. But what hurt most was knowing my father let me go without a second thought. Months passed, and I threw myself into work. The cases were intense, often keeping me late. But I flourished under pressure. With each win, my confidence grew. I wasn't just a lawyer, I was a force. Daniel started giving me bigger cases, and soon I was known as one of the firm's rising stars. The growth wasn't just professional, it was personal. I learned to stand alone, to make choices without worrying about fitting my family's mold. Every step forward proved I was more than they'd ever seen. One afternoon, Daniel called me into his office. It was simple but functional, like him. He motioned for me to sit, his sharp green eyes studying me. "Elizabeth," he began, his tone careful, "I've got a case I think you're ready for. It's big, complex, and it'll put you in the spotlight." I nodded, intrigued. "What's the case?" I asked, leaning forward. He paused, then said, "We're representing a client suing Carter and partners for negligence in a contract dispute. It's high stakes and getting attention." He watched me closely. The words hit hard, my stomach nodding. "You want me to sue my father's firm?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Daniel nodded. "I know it's personal, Elizabeth, but that's why I want you. You know how Carter and Partners works, and you're one of our best. If anyone can win this, it's you." I took a deep breath, processing it. "Daniel," I said slowly, "you know what this could mean for me, personally and professionally. It's not just a case, it's my family." He leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "I get that. But this is your shot to show what you can do, to prove the people who doubted you wrong. Think about it. This could define your career." I sat back, the weight sinking in. "This is a lot," I said quietly. He nodded, understanding. "I don't need an answer now. It's a big ask. Sleep on it, and let me know by tomorrow night." That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing. Taking the case meant facing my father, the man who dismissed me and handed everything to James. It meant challenging my family's legacy, the name that had both helped and hindered me. But it also meant proving I could stand alone, even if it burned my last tie to them. For 2 days, I weighed it all, my father's rejection, my mother's silence, James's entitlement, and the chance to show them I wasn't just William Carter's daughter. By the second day's end, I decided. I walked into Daniel's office the next morning, shoulders squared. "I'll take it." I said simply. He grinned. I knew you would. Let's get to work. The first litigation day arrived, tension thick in the air. I entered the courtroom, briefcase in hand. My heels clicking on the floor. My client walked beside me, trusting me completely, but all I could think about was the moment ahead. As I neared the front, I saw them, my father and James at the opposing table. Their eyes met mine, and their shock was palpable. My father's jaw clenched, recognition dawning. James's mouth dropped before he hid it with a smirk, though I saw his unease. I set my briefcase down and met their stares, refusing to waver. I was here to work. And nothing, not their surprise or disapproval, would shake me. For a moment, my father's gaze softened, but he quickly straightened, whispering to James. I didn't care what he said. I was ready. As the proceedings started, I fell into my role effortlessly. Every motion, argument, and document was precise. I kept my voice calm, my demeanor steady, focusing only on the case. When the judge addressed me, I answered confidently, unshaken by my father's presence or James's smirks. In that room, I wasn't their daughter or sister. I was Elizabeth Carter, attorney for the plaintiff, and I was there to win. James stumbled through his arguments, unprepared, and I didn't react. I treated him like any opposing counsel, respectful but relentless. When he faltered, I countered with evidence and law, leaving no room for error. My father stayed quiet, watching me, but it didn't matter. I wasn't seeking his approval anymore. After a few sessions, it was clear I was in control. James's weak arguments collapsed under my responses, his inexperience obvious. My father tried to help, but he couldn't fix it. By the fourth session, they offered a settlement. I saw the frustration on my father's face as their counsel negotiated terms. After some adjustments, we settled, strongly in my client's favor. As we signed, I caught my father's glance, defeated, maybe regretful. James wouldn't meet my eyes, staring down like a scolded child. I said nothing. My job was done, and I'd proven my point. Usually, I'd linger after a session, chatting with my client and opposing counsel, a small professional courtesy. But this time, my father and James left without a word, no handshake, no acknowledgement. It hurt more than I expected. I'd hoped for some sign they'd seen my worth, but their silence left a void. I shook it off, focusing on my client. I'd won. That's what counted. That evening, my firm celebrated. Daniel clapped my shoulder, grinning. Flawless, Elizabeth. That settlement's a huge win. My team cheered, and my client thanked me warmly. Surrounded by people who valued me, I smiled, owning my victory. Later, alone in my apartment, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, the Houston skyline glowing outside. The day's high faded, and my thoughts turned to my family. I replayed their shock, my father's tension, James's avoidance. I'd expected anger, not silence. I'd wanted his respect for years, and even after beating them, I wasn't sure what I'd gained. Did they see me now, or was I just their failure? The questions lingered as I stared into the night, wondering if those ties could ever heal. The next morning, Daniel approached me at the office. His tone cautious. Elizabeth, your father's here. He's in your office. My stomach flipped, but I kept my face neutral. Thanks, I said, heading down the hall. I opened my office door. And there he was, William Carter, seated across from my desk, hands clasped. He looked up, his expression guarded but tinged with something. Regret, maybe. Elizabeth, he said quietly. I shut the door. Dad? I replied evenly. What are you doing here? He stood slowly, smoothing his suit. I came to talk, he said, his voice serious. To say things I should have said before. I set my bag down, crossing my arms. Okay, I'm listening. He hesitated, glancing out the window, then back at me. You were incredible in that courtroom, Elizabeth. I've seen the best lawyers out there. And you were remarkable. Prepared, poised, relentless. You proved who the better lawyer was. His words surprised me, but I stayed composed, waiting. I've spent my life thinking legacy meant keeping things traditional, he continued, regret in his voice. That a son should inherit what a father built. I thought I was right pushing James, even knowing he wasn't ready. But I was wrong. You've worked harder than anyone, and I didn't see it. I failed you. I blinked, unsure how to respond. This was the man who dismissed me. And now he was admitting fault. Why now? I asked cautiously. Why say this after everything? He met my eyes, honest. Because I saw what you can do. I've been a fool. James isn't ready. Maybe never will be. But you've shown you can lead. He stepped closer, almost pleading. Elizabeth, come back. Take your place at Carter and Partners. The firm needs you. I need you. His words hung there, the offer I'd once dreamed of. But now? I wasn't sure. What about James? I asked. What happens to him? His face tightened. He'll stay, in a role that fits him. This is about you, giving you what you've earned. I exhaled, processing. I need time, I said firmly. A lot's happened. I can't decide now. He nodded, understanding. Take what you need. I'm not asking for an answer today. I just had to speak. He moved to leave, then turned back. Elizabeth, he said softly, I know I've rarely said it, but I'm proud of you. In that courtroom. You were better than I ever was, better than I'd imagined. His words hit deep, and he gave a small, hesitant smile before leaving. Alone, I sat at my desk, his praise echoing. I'd fought so long to prove myself, and now I felt pride, not just from him, but for me. I'd stood my ground, thrived, shown the world what I could do. Now, lying in bed that night, I stare at the ceiling, weighing his offer. It's everything I wanted, Carter and Partners, my legacy. But returning means facing old wounds, working with James, who never valued it. Staying here. I've grown, but it's not my family's firm, the dream I had as a girl. If I go back, I could shape it my way, prove the name's mine too. The choice is impossible, keeping me awake. What would you do? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them.